Hi.
Hey Jess.
How are you?
Wonderful.
I know this wasn't on camera, but I was holding something that I was going to show you. But then, what did you just do to my hand?
I just grabbed it because it was like shaking so bad.
So I told Melissa today that Kate, my daughter, I was doing something in the morning, like with making breakfast or helping her pack her lunch, and I was doing something quickly, but I was very like disconnected at the time. I like made this weird motion, and she's like, "Your glitches are so funny," and I just started dying laughing. And I was like, she's like, "Is that your Parkinson's?" And I was like, "Yeah, it is." She's like, "I'm sorry." I'm like, "No, it's okay." I'm like, she's
Glitches,
like,
huh?
because she demonstrated. She's like, "You just went like this and put your foot up," and it's just because I get like it's just weird in the morning. But, anyways, off topic, kind of not off topic, but what we're going to talk about today, we have an interview coming up, is about probiotics and gut health. You love to talk about gut health.
I do. I'm a strong believer that it has something to do with the gut.
Well, we're going to ask Martha Carlin is who we're bringing on. We're going to ask her about growling of your stomach and if that has anything to do with it. Because you made that connection one time. I'm like, that's not the same
No, it was like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. But so we're going to talk about gut health. Welcome to The Secret Life of Parkinson's, a podcast created by people living with Parkinson's to help break the stigma of a disease no one likes to talk about. Now, here are your hosts, Jessica Krauser and Brian Baker. So joining us today is Martha Carlin. Martha, hello. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me today.
And I really just want to jump right in terms of, because you have a very interesting background of how you got into probiotics and gut health. So I just want to let you kind of just tell that side of your story, and then we'll talk about what your probiotics have done. And I've been on them now for 2.5 months. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. But why don't you just give us like your history of like what you do and how did you get here?
Sure. So actually my background and training in school was in accounting. I came out of school and went to work for Arthur Andersen in their auditing and consulting department. And one of the things that they taught us there was this methodology of how to look at a business for identifying business risk. And we would draw these flow charts of everything that's going through the business, who touches it, where there could be a potential break point. And so that taught me a lot about systems and how everything is interconnected. And I went on from my career at Arthur Andersen to a commercial real estate operations. And I was what's kind of called a turnaround expert. So they would bring me in to turn around troubled businesses. But along the way, in 2002, my 44-year-old husband, John, was diagnosed with Parkinson's when our children were 2 and 4. And then I had an older child that was 9 years older than our 4-year-old. So 13, I guess. I actually diagnosed it before the doctor diagnosed it. And when we went to the neurologist said, "You know what I'm going to tell you, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You should be a neurologist." And it had started out with him with just like a loss of facial expression for me was one of the big clues, because of the way that expression, when somebody's looking at you and you feel their emotion and their love, and it was gone.
Yeah.
And
now, had you been exposed to Parkinson's previous to that? How did you know to look for those signs?
Well, interestingly, I had read Michael J. Fox's first book that same year, and then I read another little more stressful book called Saving Millie by a news anchor from CNN, Mort Kondracki. And so I'd read those 2 books. And so I had kind of in the back of my mind some of those symptoms and that loss of facial expression. And he had a tiny little tremor in his pinky and a little tremor in his tongue.
Huh.
And of course, and this is nothing against neurologists, but they they have a certain air to that. Like not all of them, but many of them are very just kind of matter of fact and hold with the facts. You have Parkinson's, it's progressive. There's nothing you can really do except here, take this drug. Here's a couple of brochures. And of course, I'm a turnaround expert. I'm a problem solver. And so I went home within 24 hours. I mean, this was 2002. I was deep into the internet. I was ordering books. I had my stack of books I was reading, and started to kind of think about Parkinson's in the way that I thought about business, which is what's flowing through the system. So, of course, food and water are the main things flowing through the system. And most of our, in medical school, they don't really teach much nutrition or anything about food or nutrients. I mean, I think they get 1 3-hour credit course or something on that, unless they decide to take more coursework. So there's very little understanding of that. And of course, that's the fuel that drives everything in our body. And John was a marathon runner, and he, when you're running those marathons, they suck on that goo, which is a lot of fructose, and they carb load and, just sort of the whole diet. He was also drinking these soy protein shakes. So I kind of started down the rabbit hole of looking at corn and soy, because these were kind of two of the main ingredients flowing through the system. And that's when I sort of had this epiphany about all the herbicides in food, and threw everything out, and we went organic. It was interesting because his tremor went away when we changed our food. And his progression was really pretty slow. He was in a clinical trial for the Precept trial that was supposed to slow the progress. And they told us when we would go do the brain scans that he was like in the 99th percentile in terms of slow progression and how well he was doing. And I thought that had to do a lot with food. So I continued to read and research about genetically modified foods, how we were modifying foods, what kinds of genes we were putting in there, and deeper and deeper into the herbicides. And you may have seen in the last, I would say, less than 6 months, there have been several big news announcements about connections to specific herbicides and pesticides and Parkinson's disease. And I actually got to know Beata Ritz at UCLA, who had identified what's called Parkinsons Alley, which is in the Central Valley of California. And that's where 50% of the produce in America is grown. And she had done all of this epidemiological research on the increase in Parkinson's in.
You call it Parkinsons Alley?
It's called Parkinsons Alley. I have a personal blog where I write about Parkinson's, and that's called Martha's Quest.
Yeah. And
there's a blog post in there about Parkinsons Alley and about some of her work. So, I'm learning all this stuff and putting the pieces together. And then in 2014, I read a book called Missing Microbes by Dr. Martin Blazer. And he was talking about the rise in all these chronic diseases with the onset of antibiotics. So the overuse of antibiotics in medicine as well as in the food supply. And I was like, that's it, because
there's antibiotics in food supply?
Oh, yeah. They use antibiotics as growth promoters in cows and pigs. And you give an antibiotic and they'll gain weight faster.
Oh.
So there's, I went down that rabbit hole too. But I also knew from talking to people with Parkinson's, I had talked to many people with Parkinson's who had chronic strep infections as children, or some people who had acne and had taken antibiotics for their acne for, sometimes 2 or 3 years. And I had 23andMe actually go into their data and look for a correlation, and they did find a statistically significant correlation with the number of strep infections, 4 or more strep infections and Parkinson's disease. And so that was like this big epiphany. And about later that year, at the end of 2014, Dr. Filip Scheperjans, a neurologist in Finland, published the first paper where he showed he could identify, there's 2 different types of Parkinson's, I'm sure you know, tremor dominant and posture and gait. And he was able to separate them by the bacteria in their gut. And I said, that's it. The gut is the general ledger. Back to my accounting. So, I'm quitting my job and I'm going to go look at this. And that's what I did.
So did you know that they broke it out into 2 like that, tremor dominant and gait?
I know I've always heard of tremor dominant and then like rigidity.
I never heard that. I mean, it makes sense.
PIG, I think, is what they call it, but it's posture and gait, which is the more rigidity.
Huh. Because that's like one of the things that always bothers me is like there's so many different kinds of like who deals with what and how you're progressing and this and that. So, okay, so you went, and in 2014, that's when you switched your career, and then it led you down a path to start a company, and you started making probiotics. Well, so how'd you get there?
First I started collecting poop. Because I knew the answers were in the microbiome, and I founded the BioCollective with Dr. Jack Gilbert from the University of Chicago, who was one of the stars of the microbiome field, and Dr. Suzanne Vernon, who had been studying chronic fatigue at the CDC for about 17 years. And we saw these commonalities in the gut and started talking about how, we have disease classifications in this reductionist thinking, but really these are systemic problems across the population that present in different ways. And we felt like the microbiome would be a way to get at that. So we started building a biobank of poop samples, basically fecal samples from the broader population. But of course, because of my interest in Parkinson's, I was connected with a lot of patient groups, and Parkinson's people were interested in participating. So I ended up collecting, probably one of the larger Parkinson's cohorts over the course of time, and some people with multiple samples. And we shared that data with researchers at Caltech. We published a paper on researchers at University College Cork in Ireland, and we started to do machine learning and identified some key biomarkers that we've done some presentations on but haven't presented. But one of the big epiphanies was the people in our lab who processed the fecal samples could actually tell if a person had Parkinson's without any other information by looking at the stool that they were processing.
Really?
Because people with Parkinson's had sections of their stool that were the consistency of concrete, indicating a severe water homeostasis problem. And it was interesting because I've never seen anything published on this. I've talked to a lot of Parkinson's researchers, but
why wouldn't they make that a biomarker?
Well, because maybe we're the only people who know about it and we haven't published it. Chronic constipation.
Yeah.
About 70 to 80% of people with Parkinson's, they may have had chronic constipation for 10 to 15 years, or even longer. So my husband, John, actually remembered back to his childhood when he was a toddler. His mother would have to bribe him to go number 2. So, that was an indication of, problem with bowel movements all the way back into his childhood.
Did you have constipation?
No, I have not.
No, that's the only thing, like that's, because I hear that a ton. Like a lot of people, like at the gym, we actually talked about doing an episode on constipation and how different people have tried to get relief, and because it's horrible. I mean, honestly, the only time I ever had it was right after I had the twins, but that's normal after having kids.
Right.
But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
But yeah, I mean, IBD, or so there. Malu Tanzi is a Parkinson's researcher at the University of Florida who's an immunologist, and she studies also IBD because about a third of the people who have IBD will go on to develop Parkinson's, and so it can be intermittent, alternating constipation with diarrhea, or it can be diarrhea, or it can be constipation, but definitely some issues with water homeostasis. So as we were collecting these samples and starting to have these insights, I went to the World Parkinson's Congress in Portland in 2016. And at that time, John had been under a lot of stress and was not doing as well. So he was having trouble walking. He was freezing more. His gait was freezing more. He was having trouble navigating crowds. And I saw the researchers, or the people from Clinic Crowd, who were presenting the research on the sugar alcohol mannitol and its ability to stop the aggregation of the proteins in a mouse model and actually pull them out of the brain. And I came back from that and bought a mannitol chemistry book and started looking at mannitol chemistry. And
okay, what's that?
I'm sorry?
What's mannitol?
Mannitol is a sugar alcohol.
Oh.
So it's actually the most abundant sugar in nature. It's highly present in plants, especially plants that are under osmotic stress. So again, back to that water homeostasis. So, things like a watermelon or a cactus, anything that's got that sort of gel or needs to hold water in a drought situation will have more. Celery has more mannitol. And so I started looking at it, and there were a handful of bacteria, just a few bacteria that actually make mannitol from glucose and fructose. And I also knew from from my husband and also from many Parkinson's meetings I had attended that a lot of people with Parkinson's are sugar addicts.
Are you?
I don't think I've ever been to a Parkinson's meeting that didn't have donuts.
Oh, God. Melissa, don't say anything.
And I mean, I actually kind of got to the point where when I went to these things, I started scolding people. and scolding because, sugar feeds inflammation and is poison, basically. So we shouldn't take sugar as giving somebody we love, like we use sugar to represent love, which it really isn't. So remember that on Valentine's Day. Give them a vegetable. But anyway, so I had a advisor and friend who also shared lab space with me, who was a fermentation chemist, who had come from the human probiotics business, and he was working on antibiotics in animal feed and stuff, trying to get that out using probiotics. And so I sat down with him, and we came up with the formula to try for John, which it ultimately became one of the main formulas we sell. And within a month, we were measuring John's microbiome, but within a month of taking it, it was obvious he wasn't walking with a cane anymore. His facial expression was back. It was remarkable. And so we started sharing it with other people, and with not Parkinson's people, just anybody. And all these people were like, oh, this is great. So, we sort of sold it, but really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. We were mostly just making it for John and friends. And then when COVID came along, we had finished up a big grant we had with the NIH, and we were concerned about collecting fecal samples anymore and exposing our people in the lab to that. So we shut down that operation and said, okay, let's go for it with the probiotics, because we have this concept of how to restore gut function. We had developed at that time these concepts for 20 different formulas. We have 5 of them right now, but and we brought the products to market in 2021, and we have not done a clinical trial in Parkinson's, but about that same time, it's kind of interesting. more research started coming out on Parkinson's in the gut more. And of course, I've been following it. There, if you go to PubMed, the number of papers on Parkinson's in the gut is just like
it's crazy. Yeah, because after we talked the first time that we met, I was searching like a ton on gut health, and I already like it's something that everybody knows. I feel like your immune system, or everything, brain health, like it all starts with the gut. One of the things that I wanted to talk about and tell people is that I thought was really interesting is the glyphosate. Did I remember that correctly? So glyphosate is what is it? I'm sorry. I remember the name and I remember it's bad, and your probiotic helps
break it down.
Yeah.
So glyphosate and glyphosate-based herbicides are, so that's what they spray on the field for the GMO corn and the GMO soil that kills all the weeds, but the plants have been engineered to take it. And it affects, plants that haven't, or weeds, and also it affects bacteria. And of course, the bacteria in our gut are what are making vitamins, hormones, neurotransmitters, and many of those are in something called the shikimate pathway that is affected by glyphosate. And so you can't make all these molecules downstream because the bacteria aren't there to make those molecules for you. And so one of the things I was looking for was a strain of bacteria that could break down glyphosate without producing something called the AMPA, which is more toxic to the brain. So many bacteria can break it down partially, but they'll produce this molecule called the AMPA, which is even more toxic to the brain than glyphosate.
What were you going to say?
So what's the difference between maybe the supplements you make and like what I could just go to the local pharmacy or Kroger's and get for as far as, because probiotics is a key, is a hot word, I think, anymore within the pharmaceutical dietary supplement.
It is a hot word. So there are 3 large commercial producers of probiotic strains. So one is Danesco, which is connected with DuPont. Another is a company called Chris Hansen. Chris Hansen was recently bought by Novozymes. And the other is a Swedish company called Probi. So if you go into a grocery store, most of the probiotics there will be getting all of their strains from 1 or 2 of those large producers, and they'll all be the same. So the strains are not particularly different.
And they're usually like only 1, maybe 2, whereas you've combined certain, like you have lactobacillus, which I think lactobacillus is the most popular, at least from what I would know from things that I see. But you have like in this, that I have the Simple Slumber here with me. And there's it's a proprietary blend. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Is there 5? Is that right? And then
we have some that are proprietary to us that we actually isolated and went through all the work to do the what's called generally regarded as safe work. And we also use a computational model that allows us to predict how the bacteria work together in a system, what they use and produce, and how they help each other. So when we were looking to produce mannitol, we combined a team of microbes that actually are synergistic, and they break down more of the glucose and fructose to produce mannitol as a team than they would individually. And so we're designing working teams. So like the sleep formula, we designed to make bacterial melatonin and tryptophan, which helps with sleep. So and there are some people starting to think about that, and there are some groups with proprietary strains. There's another company called Neurali that has come out of Korea, and they've done a number of clinical trials in Parkinson's, actually. and they have a single strain of Lactobacillus plantarum. And they're actually, I think, doing a U.S. clinical trial. And I've been talking to, I have a donor that I would like to get to help fund a Parkinson's clinical trial. Parkinson's is tricky because it's such a, my husband calls it a designer disease. People have a lot of, this, that, or the other sort of symptoms, and it's not a homogenous group, really. Yeah. So endpoints, deciding kind of what the endpoint is. But we did a diabetes clinical trial, and one of the things I wanted to measure there was serum lipopolysaccharide. So that is actually, serum LPS is an inflammatory marker. And what was so interesting to me, 100% of the people who took the product showed a reduction in LPS. And there is an LPS Parkinson's animal model, and there's an LPS diabetes Parkinson's animal model. Okay. So they're using these cell wall components of gram-negative bacteria, which is what this LPS is, to make a mouse get Parkinson's-like symptoms or make a mouse get diabetes-like symptoms. So, and even in our diabetes clinical trial, there is some translation because it lowers LPS. But I think if you did a Parkinson's clinical trial, I don't know if, most people don't think about LPS being a biomarker in Parkinson's. And it's interesting, blood work is very rarely done at the neurologist. I think it would be interesting to get a cohort of people with Parkinson's and test their serum LPS, because E. coli is one of the gram-negative bacteria that can produce that, and that's implicated in some of the other microbiome research with Parkinson's.
So how many strands of probiotics are there in the world? Like, is that a known, is there? It's in my opinion, an infinite number, because fermented foods, which we used to eat a long time ago, that's the only way they had to preserve foods. And so we ate a lot of wild fermented things. So we weren't buying a culture starter at the store. We were getting a wild fermentation from the natural bacteria on the plants or in the air to make our breads or on the grains. And so there are trillions of probiotic organisms, but there are only a handful that, there's probably, I have a document somewhere. I mean, there might be 200 or so that are approved for GRAS status. How's your husband doing now? And does he take medications on top of the probiotics, or what is his regimen?
Yes. So, but he has, so I would say back in 2017, he was taking about 4 drugs, I think, at that time. So he was taking Cinemet, he was taking Mirapex, he was taking one of the MAO inhibitors, I can't remember which one, and he was taking amantadine. And he now only takes the Cinemet. Okay. So that's the medication he's on. But so he started taking the probiotic, and I mean, it's, I tell people that it's not like the magic cure, but over the course of a year of taking it, his UPDR score dropped from a 35 to a 20. And I don't know if you're familiar with but the higher the number, the more advanced your Parkinson's is. So it dropped down to a 20, and it stayed stable at a 20 until he had COVID at the end of 2021. Wow. And it was pretty severe. And so he's been kind of making his way back from that, and he's much, much better, but he's still not 100% back to where he was before having COVID. And there's, a lot of interesting inflammatory things going on with Parkinson's and COVID that have, some crossover. And I think they're starting to see more people diagnosed with Parkinson's. Yeah. As well.
So I started taking these back in December, or actually end of November, early December, which was perfect timing. My sister always would tell me to take probiotics because, just from like a health standpoint and not getting sick. And I just never was diligent about it. But so after I had a conversation with Martha, I did. And so two things that I've noticed. One, both my kids were sick, like I swear the entire month of December, entire month of January. And of course, what do they love to do? Hang on mom when they're sick, even though they're teenagers. And I, knock on wood, I didn't get sick at all. So I'm like, okay. So I know, because again, it's helpful for that as well. Actually, there's three things. So that's one. Two, I've always been, I know you're going to love talking about this, I've always been very regular when I go to the bathroom. I've never had an issue really with constipation except that one time. But this, I don't want to say made me more regular, but I think you're supposed to go a couple times a day. And, I thought normal was just once a day or every other day. And now I'm like, nope. I can just tell that difference. And then the third. That's
good to know.
We're an open book here. It's okay. Safe space. And then this one, so I take the sugar shift. Is that what it's called? That's the daytime one I take. Sugar shift. And then at night I take, it's called Simple Slumber. And I still so my issue was I was waking up at 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock. And a lot of times I could not fall back asleep, no matter how much melatonin I was taking, what I was doing, drinking tea, going to bed early, going to bed late, whatever it may be. So when I take this at night, I find myself, I will wake up at 3 and then I fall right back asleep. Maybe not every time, but it was every day I was staying awake.
Yeah.
Whereas now I'm not, and this is the only thing that I changed. So
tryptophan metabolism also is disrupted by the glyphosate. Mm-hmm. And I think, one of the things, I started looking at this 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, there were just really cotton, soy, and corn that had glyphosate on them. Mm-hmm. And that market has grown substantially because now they use it to uniformly dry crops at the end of harvest, which actually leaves more of the glyphosate on the crop. So there are 60 crops that now use glyphosate to dry down the crop. And that's oats, that's lentils, chickpeas, really all of the grains. So any sort of crop where, they're drying the plant at the end, they're using that. They also use it in the wine industry. So most of the moms across America actually did blind testing of, I can't remember, there was 10 or 20 different wine brands, mm-hmm. and, found glyphosate in the wine. It's in the food.
Oh, and I think what we talked about, or at least what I read after this, and I did a bunch of research, is it's in the water, it's in the air, because it's so abundant. And it's almost because I thought okay, what should I start eating? How can I start, what can I start changing? And there are things that you can change, but at the end of the day, it's in our environment. So that's why having a probiotic to help fight off that.
There's Zach Bush, mm-hmm. Is a doctor who makes a product called Ion. And he's done some research, and I think he's looking to do a Parkinson's clinical trial also, where you drink the Ion right before you eat. And I think the mechanism is it closes the tight junctions in the gut, and then keeps some of that cellular debris from passing over into the bloodstream. So, and I always recommend to people, if they want to learn about glyphosate, there's a researcher from MIT, Dr. Stephanie Seneff, and she wrote a book that came out a couple of years ago called Toxic Legacy, and that really is about her tremendous amount of work over the last 2 decades in uncovering all the different mechanisms, and she has a lot of very deep science on the implications in Parkinson's also.
Well, this this was very educational for me. I don't know.
Yeah, no,
because I mean, again, like we talked about gut health not too long ago, not just your stomach growling, but more than that.
More than that.
Well, the glyphosate will kill. It kills about 50% of the gut bacteria that you have are sensitive to glyphosate. So if you're losing that diversity and all, and your B vitamins are made in the gut, there's lots of evidence that deficiency of B vitamins is a problem in Parkinson's. So that loss of that gut diversity and, that constant exposure to an antibiotic, it obviously has long-term implications,
right.
But there are things you can do about it.
So what's your, like, before we close out, like, what's your, like, hope for your company for the future, which we didn't actually talk about what your company is called, the Biota Quest, right?
Biota Quest, yes.
Biota Quest. So, like, where do you see this going? And can people, like, I know they can access it, so we'll have a link to the website, or at least show people like where they can purchase this. But are your hopes to connect with other researchers or other manufacturers to talk about, like, is this a biomarker for the stool that you had, or these probiotics? How do we get them in neurologist hands? Because it's like when you leave it up to people and like, oh, just go get a probiotic, it's like, I don't know what to do. And so, but when neurologists tell you what to do, you feel like, okay, now I know my plan is.
Right. Well, it is interesting. I do have some neurologists that found me and found my work and recommend to all their new patients.
Okay.
For me, like, one of my missions is saving the world from glyphosate and saving people from ever getting Parkinson's. So I feel like if people can start to take care of their guts and understand the implications of what's going on in the food supply, then they can, if they have chronic constipation, years before they might get a Parkinson's diagnosis, they could start to address that and start to understand between their diet and taking a probiotic like this that can help break down the glyphosate, or, looking at other things that can help remove the toxic heavy metals or things that are in the food, that they would have a better outcome, that they might not ever get Parkinson's, or that they would certainly have a much better outcome if they don't know this information and they don't have these tools.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so interested all the time when I hear, especially when it's, I don't want to say natural, but it's more than just like, giving us another drug to mask something. It's like, okay, this is helping me as a whole person. Like I said, it helped hopefully keep me healthy when my kids were sick or different things like that. But I'm going to get you some.
I had somebody today I was talking to about how Sugar Shift works, and he said, I think, Martha, what it's doing is helping to restore the factory settings in the gut. And so I was like, oh, I like that.
That is good. I mean, because honestly, like, at the end of the day, you need to explain to people.
No, it makes sense. Definitely.
Restore the factory settings. I'm typing that out. Okay. What?
CRISPR.
Oh.
Not CRISPR. Not CRISPR.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. I'll do 30 seconds.
30, 14,
what do
10,
I say? I always forget what I say.
Seconds.
In our last 30 seconds, I'll leave you with this. I really do like how Martha said having probiotics in your life is just like really restoring your body to the factory settings. So take a look at the site that we've shared, and take a look at probiotics, see what's right for you, talk to your doctor. Martha, you want to say something?
Well, we do have a Parkinson's discount code. It's Parky, P-A-R-K-Y, and people with Parkinson's get 25% discount.
That is so sweet. Okay, we'll put that on there. Thank you so much. So that's a great last 30 seconds. We'll put Parky in the what is it? Discount. So everybody can at least try it. And I highly recommend it. But just like your medication, you have to be diligent about it, morning and night, however it's told on the label to use it. So Thank you very much, and we'll see y'all next time.